the radical, fundamental principles of freedom, rational self-interest, and individual rights. This is the Yaron Brook Show.
All right, everybody, welcome to Yaron Brook Show on this beautiful Puerto Rico. I know it's snowing in Minnesota, but here in Puerto Rico, it is a gorgeous day. Too bad we're not allowed to go outside and enjoy it, but it is a beautiful day. I went for a short walk. I have to watch it. The police are constantly around here, but I went for a short walk, and it was truly, truly, truly beautiful outside. Happy Easter, I guess. I don't quite get this holiday. This is a weird holiday for me. First on Friday, we celebrate Jesus getting crucified. Not a good thing to get crucified, not something deserving of celebration. And then Sunday, I guess, he gets resurrected, and we all have the possibility of redemption. But he's a God, so he couldn't have died. And he's a son of God, but gods don't have sons. Christianity is completely bewildering to me. The details of the theology are just bizarre. Judaism is so much simpler. So much simpler. I mean, do what God tells you, otherwise he's going to strike you down. I mean, that's much more straightforward. All this resurrection, redemption, and then, of course, Holy Trinity and all this stuff just is bizarre to me. So, and then, of course, you got Easter, and you get these bunnies and eggs, and you go chase eggs for rabbits who don't lay eggs, and what the hell? Why is Passover demented? Kind of demented. No, Passover is like this massive celebration of a people who were enslaved, freeing themselves from slavery. Now, freeing themselves from slavery by, their God, like crushing the enemy, killing the firstborn child of every family in Egypt. But hey, they were slave owners. It's hard to say they didn't deserve it. So yeah, I mean, it's brutal, but it's that. I mean, I relate to the God of the Old Testament much more. I mean, like he's just an angry, spiteful, narcissistic God, and he's more like the Greek gods. And he wants people to obey. He wants his people to obey, and if he needs to kill children, so be it, in order to free his people. I mean, he does what is necessary. By the way, he gave the Egyptians like 9 tries before he murdered their children. Like there were 9 plagues before he went to killing the eldest son in each family. The Egyptians blew it, right? I mean, they blew it. But yeah, I mean, the Old Testament's brutal. I mean, killing the eldest son is nothing as compared to some of the other stuff that's in the Old Testament that is far, far more brutal than that. Anyway, another time I'll tell you horrible stories from the Old Testament and how I learned to hate religion. But anyway, the whole Easter thing is beyond me. It's a beautiful day. That's what I care about, and I hope you guys had a good weekend and a wonderful weekend. Usually, Easter Sunday is this big celebration in Puerto Rico, and Old Town is like bustling and hustling, and music performances and food everywhere. And I really try to avoid it if I can. But this year it's dead. Everywhere's dead. I mean, this year's just sad. Robert writes, I like to think of Easter as a rebirth. I mean, that's that's one way to spin it. That's good. The Renaissance of being a rebirth of reason, and it's time for another. Yes, it certainly is time for another. Man, is it time for another, particularly in the midst of the complete and utter irrationality and nuttiness and stupidity and incompetence that is reflected through this this pandemic, this response to the coronavirus. Yes, it is springtime. Springtime is beautiful in Puerto Rico. Summer, not so much, but springtime is amazing. And yeah, I wish I could enjoy it, but it's illegal to go to the beach. So can't fully enjoy it. The police state has imposed, has forced me into my house, and I can't leave. Luckily, I've got an amazing view. So I can enjoy it from, in a sense, afar, right? From being outside, rather than being outside. All right, that's no good. All right. So one of the things that come out of this coronavirus is, there's a certain sense in which the environmentalists celebrating this in some sense. I'm not talking about the wacky environmentalists. There's a bunch of crazy environmentalists who think this is great because people are dying. Plague upon the earth is humanity, and therefore, this is great. But I'm talking about the fact that the environmentalists are basically saying, a few things. There's a few levels to the argument that the environmentalists are making. First, they're just pointing out that, wow, isn't it amazing to have clean air? And you're seeing a lot of photos of, I don't know if you've seen the satellite photos of China with no pollution. And it's primarily no pollution because there's no heavy industry because of the shutdowns. LA, Los Angeles, with clear blue skies, because nobody's driving. And then the water in Venice, clear and see-through because there are no boats on the canals. What happens, it's not because the water's filthy, but what happens when the boats on the canals is they cause the water to circulate, and the mud comes up from the bottom, and it makes the river look murky. And when the boats are not there, everything settles down, the mud settles down to the bottom, and you get clear water. So you get that. I was reading an article where somebody was celebrating, there are coyotes now on the Golden Gate Bridge. I don't know. People, there was an article I read about how animals are coming out. This is one of the three. Where is this article? It's somewhere here. Anyway, the three great things, positive things that have happened because of coronavirus, and one of them is the habitat for animals is expanded, and now they feel like they can go everywhere and they're safe. Why is the safety of animals a priority? I think it's horrific, the idea that there are coyotes on the Golden Gate Bridge. Where civilization is receding. Animals come in when civilization disappears, right? Civilization is the only animals that are around you, animals you choose to be around you, your pets. But all animals are not there. I don't consider it a sign of civilization that coyotes or moose or bears are roaming around the streets. That is a sign of lack of civilization, right? Civilization is where things are human built, concrete, and asphalt are signs of civilization. So, but they're celebrating the animals coming in, the lack of pollution. There's a bunch of, you have to watch this because there are a bunch of fake videos, not so much by the media, but just people putting up fake videos on Facebook and Twitter. So there was a video of dolphins, and the heading was, dolphins swimming, near Venice. Venice is now all cleaned up because the tourists are not there, and everybody's in their homes. So the dolphins have come back to Venice. Well, it turns out that this wasn't in Venice. The photos were taken in another part of Italy, near Sardinia, where dolphins are common. The dolphins there, whether they're tourists or not, the dolphins love that area. There are never dolphins in Venice. It's just not part of their habitat. So it's not. Yeah, that was a fake photo. Then there was one of also in Venice. What was it? It was. I've got too many of these photos. Let's see. Yes, it was one of swans in Venice. Yeah, if you know a little bit about this, then there's a whole thing of swans in the canals of Burano, which is a small island in the greatest Venice metropolitan area. And somebody took a photo of that, but when I was in Burano, there were swans there as well. So it's not that the swans are fake, it's fake that they weren't there before the coronavirus. And it's not that the dolphins are fake, the dolphins just, what's fake is the headline that says it's in Venice. The dolphins were actually in Sardinia, where they always are. But who cares? If the dolphins come back to Venice, that's not a good sign. That means people have receded. Civilization has receded. Yes, it's if you ever watch the movie, Planet of the Apes, when all human beings are dead, then trees are in the middle of the cities and roots of trees are knocking down buildings, and there are animals everywhere in the city. Not a good thing. That to me is a sign of decay, of death, of the end of civilization. Not something to be celebrated, something to be, oh my God, what happened to this civilization? What happened to these people? But you're seeing this as, three ways in coronavirus is a boom to the environment. One is decreased air pollution. 2, animals have more room to roam. And, 3 is something about, animal cruelty. Trading in animals. We're banning wildlife trade, rare animal trade and stuff like that. We won't be eating bad animals. I mean, that's the level. But then that's at one level, right? Just looking around and seeing what they view as the positive consequences of the coronavirus. And again, I'm not talking about the wacky libertarians who are happy to see people die. There are not that many of those kind, luckily. I'm talking about kind of the respectable libertarians, right? Environmentalists. That's called a Freudian slip. A Freudian slip. But then there are the more sophisticated environmentalists saying, look, there's a lot to learn from this epidemic, and we should be using this as an opportunity to educate people about what happens when you have a crisis and you're unprepared. What happens when you get exponential disaster and you're not ready and you're not willing to do the things up front in order to prevent it? And they're basically saying, look, there's no difference between this virus and climate change. The virus has exponential growth. It's fast. The only difference is climate change has exponential growth. It's slow. But we need to point out to people the commonalities between them, how we need to prepare for them, and how sacrifices are going to be needed. Look, people are willing to take the sacrifices for the coronavirus, but the sacrifices kind of at the last minute. What we need to do is explain to them, to people, how we can prevent the need for these great short-term sacrifices by sacrificing long-term, basically. So I see over and over and over again in articles about climate change and the coronavirus, I see over and over again this idea that both exponential, both are problems of limited capacity to cope. When the flooding happens, we're not going to be able to cope. We need to plan ahead by restricting our activities now, by going into social distancing now, I guess, so that the flooding doesn't occur in the future. I actually thought what we should be doing is building dikes, building moats, building ways in which to control the flooding, so when it happens, it doesn't hurt us as much. That's how you plan ahead for viruses. You don't say, we're gonna stop all transportation across countries so viruses cannot spread across the world. What you say is, we got to ramp up medicines. We got to prepare vaccines. We got to have ventilators and masks ready. We got to have hospital beds. Next time we got to have testing. Next time we'll do this better. But no, the way the environmentalists want us to prepare is to take the worst outcome and apply it today. which is slow life, so that there's less production. Now, look, I want to say something here before we get on to the climate change. Something is in terms of background, because there might be a lot of you out there who don't know, my position, objectivist position, advanced position on the environment. And so I want to make something clear that, and this is the context from which I take all of my discussions on the environment. The environment has no intrinsic value. Indeed, nothing does. There is no such thing as a value in and of itself, a good in and of itself. A value, which is something you want, something you act to gain or keep. A value there has to be somebody who values it. And there has to be a purpose for which they value it. So value to whom and for what? Nature, the environment, and I hate the term environment, because environment is not a thing. There's a human environment, there's a spotted owl environment, there's a dolphin environment. So, environment is meaningless. I mean, human environment, okay. But then you bring in humans, and most people use environment to mean that which is not human. But that's just nature. And nature has no value beyond what you or I or anybody else assigns it. Individual human beings assign value. And that's the value something has. Now, you could say, you guys don't completely appreciate the value of this. It's worth much more than you assess. But that's, again, in a human context. Only the human context, human life, human flourishing, human success, creates the context by which we have values. Value to whom? To a human being. For what? To live. Value to whom? To me. For what? To make enough money to buy the Ferrari, right? So, value always asks for whom, to whom, and for what. So, for example, what is the value of nature? Well, it depends. Some people love to go hiking. And, just pristine nature has a value to them in the context of their love of hiking and the spiritual value they get of sitting by a waterfall at the edge of a forest with, whatever, right? And I have, often, really enjoy nature. Not too much of it, I have to admit. At one time, I used to be a hiker and a camper. No more. I like my comforts way too much to go hiking and camping these days. But I love a beautiful view. I love to be out in nature. I love to take short hikes. I love to do that. And when I was younger, I loved it more. But within reason, I'm only willing to pay so much for that. I certainly love the beach. Right? But I love the beach with a nice, comfortable chair and an umbrella to keep the shade away. Right? So, I love my nature civilized. Like with sand brought in from where sand is soft, not necessarily the local sand that exists there, which often can be rough and annoying and obnoxious, right? So nature is fine, and to the extent that nature supports human life, and much of it does, then great. Then it is a value to those human beings who recognize that it supports human life. It's a value to them. But nature in and of itself has no value to me. And I always say, when people say, well, what about this animal, that animal being extinct? Well, if you value that animal, then, buy some of it and get a plot of land and let it Let it grow there. I don't know. But you can't impose your values on me. You can't impose your love of nature on me. You love nature, pay for it. And nature is there for me, for you, for human beings. So, nature is not an end-all, be-all. The environment is, to the extent that it's nature out there, is to serve us, whether it's to serve our recreation, our entertainment, our pleasure. Wow, Michael, thanks. Thanks for the support. I will get to your question, I promise. Let me do that, and let me do this. So that's the context. So when I see animals in cities, well, that means that the city has died. The city is gone. And what's more valuable to me, a city or nature? A city, much more valuable. So when people start talking about climate change, I always think, okay, climate change, how does it affect people? Let's say it's true. Let's say climate change is really happening. Well, how does it affect people? And how do we implement solutions that will mitigate the impact it has, just like a virus? How do we implement solutions, not by changing our lives, stopping work, stopping all activity, but how do we do things like discover vaccines, find medicines, and do testing and all the other stuff that would solve the problems we have? That's what you should do with climate change. But of course, the environmentalists don't see it that way, right? The public is coming to understand, and of course, the government response to the virus is just emboldened to the roof, the environmentalists. Because, I mean, here's a quote. The public is coming to understand that the kind of situation you have to act in a way that looks disproportionate to what the current reality is. Because you have to react to where that exponential growth will take you. In other words, disproportionality. I mean, we're basically stopping everything. So if we can do that for a virus, well, certainly we can do that for climate change. We're going to have to take disproportionate action. And the public has now accepted that we have to take disproportionate action. They have absorbed that. They've recognized that. They've internalized that. And from now on, it'll be easier for us to propose radical change because they've already gone through one crisis and they accepted radical change. How can they oppose radical change in the future when the consequences of climate change are far worse than the consequences of the virus? And of course, politicians have now recognized that they can get away with such a power grab. So politicians in the future, none of the environmentalists say this, but the fact is, the politicians of the future are going to use climate change as a power grab, and this way they can see they can get away with it. We got away with the coronavirus. Let's go for it. Now we've got a long-term excuse, one that doesn't go away, one that sticks with us, one that we can use forever. Because climate change, hey, let's be honest, climate always changes. So this opens up a whole issue of politicians who've now felt, tasted what power is like and what they can get away with. It's going to be hard. Put that genie back in the box. In the bottle. What box? Right? Now, some people are saying, look, this is going to be good for climate change because here are the consequences that they believe we're going to come out of. People are going to travel less. Yay! They're going to use Zoom more. Yay! So less pollution. A big one that you see over and over again, people saying, globalization. Oh, globalization is history. And the consequence of globalization being history is, again, a lot less emissions. We're going to buy local. If we buy local, less shipping, less trucking, less supply chains, less infrastructure, of course, more poverty, lower standard of living, low quality of life, but they don't care about that. They care about climate change. So they love the fact that globalization is now threatened. And in this sense, no, and I've said this for years now, literally for years, the left and the right are going to come together on this. The environmentalist left and the nationalistic right are going to come together. They both will agree on dramatically curbing globalization. Now that is going to be interesting, right? And scary. Because if they combine, so you can see that they're hoping that the virus has permanent impact on our lives. We work from home. We work from a distance. We don't travel. We don't want to crowd into airplanes. On the other hand, they're very afraid of the fact that we won't want to crowd into public transportation and we'll more likely drive our own car. So, two mitigating effects that they are worried about. Right. Then finally, they are urging governments, and I think in Europe they might be effective. I doubt they'll be effective in the US, but in Europe they'll be effective, and in the longer term they'll be effective in the US as well. They're urging government to use stimulus packages to start the process of the Green New Deal, to start massive investing, massive employment in so-called green technologies, in a complete restructuring of American energy production and American industry, which would basically, again, make us super poor. Super poor. So the environmentalists are going to take every advantage of this, and they're going to use this as opportunity. One of the articles was titled, Nature Sending Us a Message. This is the United Nations environmentalism chief. Nature sending us a message with the coronavirus pandemic, right? Humanity was placing too much pressure on the natural world with damaging consequences. And he's warning that failing to take care of the planet meant not taking care of ourselves. It's a clear warning shot, we are told. So they're going to draw the parallels. They're going to be really aggressive. They're going to encourage massive sacrifice, massive changes to our world. And they're going to tell people, and people I think are going to buy this. This is all a consequence of pushing the planet too far. There's a reason why suddenly we've had so many pandemics recently. SARS, SARS-2, MERS, H1N1, swine flu, which might have been H1N1, and so on. It's because we're bumping into nature more. No, but it doesn't matter. They will feed off of fear. They will feed off of people's concerns. So, again, the environmentalists will take advantage of this any way they can to bring about even more radical changes, to bring about even more shifts in our lifestyle. And this is just going to be one of the many pushes the left makes to restructure the American economy. Restructure it. The American economy post-coronavirus. Post-coronavirus. Our job, if you choose to accept it, It's to stop that. It's to stop that. It's to fight them. It's to stand up to them. It's to argue for more freedom, more capitalism, more property rights. Less concern with so-called environmental issues, not more. Less regulations, less interventions. Our agenda should be to show how, just like if the globe is actually warming, the private sector, private property, business, the profit motive, are best to deal with it just as they are best to deal with the coronavirus. That government was a massive failure here. The lesson to be learned from the coronavirus episode, from what we're experiencing right now, is the failure of central planning, the failure of government, the failure or inability of government to plan or to execute on those plans. So we want to give them more power if global warming is actually happening. No, we want to give them less power. We want to make sure that private enterprise has the right incentives, the right motivations, that is motivated by a real profit motive that is focused on the long term. I mean, think about, for example, if climate change is real, and there really are threats on climate change, think about how insurance companies could start, in a sense, pricing that in and changing people's behavior. For example, if the sea levels are going to rise, and it doesn't make sense to build homes near the sea, near the ocean, then insurance rates would go through the roof. And people would be, or insurance just wouldn't pay for homes by the ocean. People would be disincentivized to build near the ocean, and homes would move further inland. But of course, what happens today? Today, actually, government involvement in the insurance markets, actually, government forces, and actually, government provides directly insurance to people in so-called flood zones. The solution is not to stop living, stop producing, stop manufacturing, stop traveling, stop living so that climate change changes. The solution is to free us all up so that the markets can take care of whatever problems actually in reality emerge. And insurance markets, by the way, I think are an incredibly powerful tool against both so-called environmental catastrophes and viruses. The insurance industry is uniquely focused on long-term risk. That's what it does. It tries to measure those risks, plan for those risks, price those risks, and it does so when it's free. It does so in a non-zero interest rate environment, which screws up insurance completely, which is a whole different story. When it's free, it does so brilliantly. And I think as finance gets more sophisticated and as markets get more sophisticated, as we get more sophisticated, as we get more attuned to the risks out there, that insurance would only become more and more and more sophisticated. So the solution to any of these so-called problems, environmental problems, virus problems, and so on, is more capitalism, more freedom, more property rights, less regulation, primarily in this case of the insurance business, which is a business geared towards what? Reducing risk, predicting risks, forecasting risks, assessing risks, pricing risks. Imagine real competition in insurance markets across all areas, from health to property to business interruption, that took into account all these different risks. That's the solution. Now, I mean, you could imagine insurance companies building dikes in certain areas where they had significant exposure. Might be an investment worth their while. So, whenever faced with a big problem, whatever faced with significant issues that are real, like a virus, like maybe certain issues around climate, the solution can never be less freedom. The long-term solution is always more freedom, not less. All right, so the environmentalists are going to use this. The environmentalists are celebrating some of the consequences of this, of the virus. All right. The failures that we have today are failures of statism. The failures that we have today are failures of government. The failures that we have today are failures of regulations and controls, and the limitations placed on government, on markets, and the limitations placed on science, and the limitations placed on technology. All right, let's take some of these super chat questions quickly. And then if we have time, I've got a few things to say about opening the economy, but if I don't get to them today, I'll just talk about that next time. Although I guess one of the questions here is giving me an excuse to talk about opening the economy. All right, so I'll take the first question, which had the most dollars associated with it. Hi, Yaron. I agree with your thoughts on China, not an enemy. No diplomatic relations. Let individuals trade as they see fit. What about sale of military equipment? Is it right for government to interfere? Yes, I definitely think it's right for government to interfere in the sale of medical, and my view is we should be a lot more stringent, not less stringent, in the sale of military equipment. We shouldn't be selling military equipment to countries like Saudi Arabia. We shouldn't be selling military equipment even to a country like Turkey. We shouldn't be selling military equipment to anybody who might be who might be at some point an enemy of the United States, or is an enemy like Saudi Arabia, which I believe is an enemy. We should not be selling military equipment to any country that there is a good probability, I don't know, greater than 10%, that they will turn around and use that equipment against us. So military, I'm going to say something you're going to hate me for. I'm going to say something that's going to create, as usual, controversy, because I know many of you hate me for this position. But I believe government has a role in guns. The bigger the gun, the bigger the role. It has a role in which guns Americans can buy. And it certainly has a role in which guns foreign countries can buy. And the primary concern of the American government is that those guns not be used against Americans, domestic and foreign, by domestic players or foreign players. But primarily as a foreign policy issue, absolutely we should not be selling weapons to a regime that could use those weapons against us in any way, shape, or form. And then there's the question of technologies that are used for weapons. So you'd have to make a case-by-case argument about a particular technology, to what extent is its use military or not. But the government has a role in anything related to force, and therefore technologies that are related to force, the government has a role in. Do you give Trump any credit for handling the bias of the liberal press? How would you handle their dishonesty and bias? No, I don't give him any credit. I mean, I give him credit to the sense that he recognizes that bias, okay. But his way of dealing with it is unhelpful, it's crass, and it's borderline, it's threatening in a way that a president of the United States should never threaten the press because of First Amendment issues. It is vulgar, it is ignorant, it is stupid, it is because he attacks the press sometimes when they deserve to be attacked, and he attacks the press sometimes when they don't deserve to be attacked. He attacked the press, for example, for not agreeing with him that the number of people at his inaugural address was larger than any other, even though satellite photos clearly showed it wasn't. And he attacked the press as biased because of that. What that does is, in the mind of any rational person, it discredits all of his attacks. and his vulgarity, his boorishness, discredits his view, and therefore discredits him even when he's right. Even when he's right to attack the press or to criticize the press. Now, what would I do? I would, in a smart, respectful, fact-filled way, illustrate how the press is biased and how the press is wrong and how the press disinforms. And you can do that easily because it's so easy to do, because the press is so bad on so many different issues. And I would pick important issues, not how they treat him, which I don't think is that important, but how they treat the issues, how they treat the facts. But for that, you see, this is the problem. A liar can't criticize liars. It doesn't mean anything. It loses all meaning. So to be a good, effective critic of the bias, the bias of the media, how they treat Republicans, but more than that, how they treat the facts, how they treat reality, how they treat capitalism, how they treat freedom. You can't be a liar too. So you have to establish credibility. And Republicans have no credibility because Fox News treats Democrats just like the Democratic media treats Republicans. And Fox News, and Republicans praise Fox News. And Donald Trump praises those people at Fox News that love him and denounces those people at Fox News that don't like him. The only standard for him is the standard of a narcissist. It's the standard of how they treat him, not how they treat reality, how they treat facts, how they treat truth. I mean, the attacks on the New York Times should not be about how they treat Republicans. The attacks on the New York Times should be about how they treat reality. They're bullshit economics. They're garbage authoritarianism. The fact that they want more government controls. The nonsense they argue about in terms of environmentalism. Or the absolute horrible, and I don't think Trump even dealt with this 1619 project that basically, and I need to do a show on this, I know, that actually positioned the whole history of the United States as in the context of slavery, as if nothing else matters except slavery. America was founded in 1619 when the first slaves arrived in America. That is the standard. That you should go after the New York Times and rip them to shreds, as many commentators have, and did a very good job doing it. But that should be the focus on the absolute nutty leftist agenda that infiltrates every aspect of the news. But then you have to have facts to counter it. I could open up the New York Times any day and just read the headlines and tell you what's wrong with the stories. Right? But the issue there is not that they hate Donald Trump any more than the issue with Fox News was that they hated Barack Obama, which they did. And they distorted stuff that Barack Obama did. Even though I hated Obama, I still hate Obama. But it's not about personalities. It's not about people. It's not about how you relate to them. It's about facts. It's about reality. The purpose of journalists is to present us with facts. And if you want to criticize them for that. Right? And the same is true of all the journalists, but it's the same on the right, the same as the left. There's very little good journalism out there. And on the other hand, as I've said before, once in a while, whenever you do get a piece of good journalism, it's usually from the same mainstream media outlets that we hate so much because they're so mixed. So, the best thing of journalism recently was the expose the Washington Post did on the Afghanistan war and the views of the government officials about the Afghanistan war. And that was great journalism. But nobody complimented them. Nobody indeed cared. And The fact that the Washington Post is also biased on a lot of its other stuff doesn't erase the fact that once in a while they do really good stuff. Christopher says Trump has the media in his palms. No, he doesn't have the media in his palms. What Trump has is he knows, in this sense you're right, he knows how to manipulate the media to get himself headlines, because Trump believes, and he might be right, that, what matters is to be mentioned. What matters to be in the headlines. What matters is to be the center of attention. That in a shallow, reality TV focused, unthinking America, that the way to get elected is to be outrageous, to be bullish, and to get your name in every single headline, in every single newspaper, every single day. Trump, and this I'll give him credit for, is a brilliant marketer. He's a brilliant marketer when it comes to his hotels, and in his real estate. He's a brilliant marketer when it comes to playing the media and when it comes to politics. That's what distinguishes him from everybody else in politics. It's his skill at marketing. And again, he will lie, cheat, deceive, just like the left, in order to create great marketing content. He's not an objectivist hero, but of course, no president is an objectivist hero. I'm not measuring Trump versus an ideal president. I'm measuring Trump versus any other president. And in my view, he's about as bad as the worst of them. He's not better than Obama as a president. Some of his policies are better than Obama, but as a president, and in terms of what it means to be president, and in terms of the institution of the presidency, he is in many respects worse than Obama, worse than Bush, even though they're all bad. So I'm not comparing him or any president to an objectivist president. I mean, an objectivist candidate would never get elected. Right? So it's not that my comparison is that. It's my comparison is a human being, a decent human being. And Trump, in my view, is not a decent human being. He's just not. And an awful president is a consequence. When the politicians talk about the plan, re-corona going forward, it's a vague framework that amounts to little or no plan, absolutely. Yet, they've given high marks for leadership. How do they get away with it? Well, they get away with it because people are afraid. And when people are afraid, and I've said this before about fear and about emotion and about when people are not trained to think for themselves. What happens when people are afraid is they look for leadership. They look for somebody who looks like they know what they're doing. And unfortunately, in America today, there are not that many people who can think for themselves, who can put together information, data, know which resources to use and which to not. I mean, we can complain about the mainstream media all we want, but the fact is that there's more sources of information, of data, of analysis, of points of view available to all of us today than at any point in human history. I mean, I said this many times. I don't listen to any television news, any. I never watch CNN or CNBC or MSNBC or Fox News or Fox Business or anything. I just don't. And yet, I'm better informed than 99% of people out there. Because I read, and I check up on my sources, and I go read commentary, and I read more from this perspective, or more from that perspective, and I read the left, and I read the right, and I read economists that I admire, and thinkers I admire, whether I agree with them on everything or not. That's the only way to do it. And people don't do that. And people are afraid, and people get conflicting information, and they're scared. And again, when you're scared, you look for leadership. But you're right. There is absolutely no plan. And the only plan they had before was shut down or keep everything open. There's no plan. There's no thinking. There's no strategy. There's nothing. And the same, somebody asked, what do you make of Texas being the first state to reopen its economy? Well, is it really reopening its economy? And is it the first state? There are a bunch of states that never closed the economy. I was just reading that South Dakota, the governor says, it's not my job to close the economy. People should make a decision about whether they want to go to work or not. I recommend social distancing, but people should make a decision about how much they want to social distance. I mean, in South Dakota, they haven't, or North Dakota, or a number of other states, they have not closed down the economy. So Texas might be the first state to reopen, but what's the plan to reopen? How are they going to reopen? And so maybe I'll say a few things about reopening the economy. Again, there's no plan. I don't see a plan in Texas on how to reopen the economy. If there are a lot of infections in Texas, they're going to reopen the economy, and then if a lot of people get infected, would they close it again? How are they going to prevent new people from getting infected? How do they prevent the hospitals going to be overloaded in July or in August, or if it's seasonal, in October or November? What's the plan? Now, Texas has an advantage that it's going into the warm season, and there's some reason, although it's not clear, to think that the virus is seasonal, and during the warm season, hot and humid in Texas, it won't spread quite as much as it does in cold weather. But what if that doesn't work out? Is there a plan? Now, my view is you've got to have a plan. And the plan goes back to what we should have done initially. We should have never locked down the economy to begin with. The plan should have been straightforward, and I've been saying this for 2 months. Test, trace, and isolate on a massive scale. Again, instead of a $2 trillion stimulus package, which was caused by the fact that these idiots locked down the economy. Instead of that, you could have, if the government has to do it, you could have scaled massively on testing, used private companies, but used government dollars on a massive scale to test, then use the money to hire thousands and thousands and thousands of people who would then use, whether it's technology or whether it's just the old-fashioned way of interviewing people, about tracing where they went, who they met, who they saw, who they might have infected, going to those people and testing them, and then creating facilities where you can isolate people, whether it's hotels, or you can try to get people to isolate themselves at home, but if they don't live up to that, you put them in a hotel and you say you can't leave. For 2 weeks, can't leave. That's completely legitimate. That is the role of government. Instead of all of us being imprisoned in our homes, imprison those who have the virus, because those who have the virus are a threat to the individual rights of others, and that is completely legitimate role of government, to isolate them. So as states open up, what they should be doing is opening up with a staff of thousands to test, trace, and isolate. And at the same time, give clear guidance about social distancing, about who's at risk. We're still afraid to say it, and I still get resistance even from people who follow me. This is a virus that threatens old people by orders of magnitude more than it threatens young people. So to the extent that we're going to isolate anybody, isolate old people. So tell people, kick your mother-in-law out of the house. Put her up in a hotel. Don't let her leave. Get her food, what do they call it? Uber Eats or something, and make sure she has enough food, and keep her away from the kids and keep her away from everybody else. Open the schools, let people back to work with the idea of social distancing, with the idea of wearing masks, with the idea of washing your hands, with the idea of don't touch your face. And 65-year-olds and above don't go to work anyway, and they don't go to school anyway. So what's the problem? Just keep them isolated. And that should be done voluntarily. It's not that hard. People should care about old people. old age homes and different facilities for old people should be isolating them, which they are. But they don't need the government to tell them that. They're there. It's their responsibility to take care of their population, and this is what they should do. So, opening up the economy. Now, it's going to be very difficult to open up the economy because even if everything goes right, first of all, we don't have the testing, and we don't have the isolation, and we don't have the tracking. So what is going to happen? People are going to get infected again. You're going to go through this cycle of infection and non-infection and warm and cold weather, and on we go for 2 years until there's a vaccine. And who knows if in 2 years we'll have a vaccine. And that'll be crippling to the economy because you won't be able to project, is the economy going to be open next month or is it going to be closed? What sections are going to be open? What sections are going to be closed? It's just a disaster from an economic planning perspective and therefore from an economic perspective. People in the economy, for the economy to thrive, need to be able to plan ahead. And what's going to happen? The government's going to keep printing money to keep people employed. But the stimulus packages, is, for example, incentivize people not to go back to work because they get more money for longer under unemployment insurance because of what the stimulus package has increased unemployment insurance. Many people will get 116% of their salary. Why would they go back to work? If they can stay home or work in the black market and make more money. And a lot of restaurants, let's say now you have social distancing. Let's say you have social distancing. Well, how do you do that in restaurants? So restaurants now have to spread out the tables more and they have to take in less customers. Well, if they take in less customers, they have less revenue. But their expenses are about the same because restaurants have a lot of fixed costs. How are they going to make a profit? How are airlines ever going to become profitable again? Well, prices are going to have to go up significantly if you're going to keep middle seats open in all airplanes. If prices go up, demand will go down. Airlines are going to have to shrink, and our ability to travel is going to be reduced. Every way you look at this, the long-term consequences to the economy are negative. There is no silver lining. There's nothing positive about this. I mean, every industry that is being touched by the coronavirus is going to stay touched as long as we don't get rid of it. And the only way to get close to getting rid of it, testing, tracking, and isolation. And you do that, you build this infrastructure up, and you keep it there for months. But that is the least intrusive. And people say, ooh, privacy, we're going to have to trace people. Of all the solutions to this that do not involve mass death, intrusiveness of tracking, particularly if the tracking is done by companies like Apple and Google, or by other tech companies, is the least of your worries. I'm happy for them to track my phone if they leave me free otherwise. And if I can disable the app once this thing is over. Somebody says the solution to this is hydrochloroquine. Come on, people, really? I mean, you really have to believe literally every single thing that comes out of Donald Trump's mouth, with unjudgmentally? Hydroxy something, might help. It's not a miraculous cure. It's thousands of people are right now being treated with it in hospitals. There's a massive supply of the drug that's gone out there. This is the malaria drug that in combination with what do you call it? Antibiotics is being used in thousands of hospitals. And it might relieve some symptoms. And it might be a good cure for some people. But it's not magic. It's not the thing that if you take, this is it. That is bullshit on a massive scale. And good, I'm glad you listen. You follow one doctor. That's good, one doctor. Good for you. That's the way to get objective information about it, right? This is being used on thousands of people, and it's not curing anywhere near the kind of percentages that people claim it is. Unfortunately, I wish it was. Now, I'm not against it. I'm against doing more, using it more, testing it more, but it's not a cure. By the way, somebody asked which comments do I read? I read the Super Chat questions. I read the ones that have dollar signs next to them, the ones where people are contributing money towards my website, my project, this YouTube channel. There is a feature in YouTube that allows you to click and make a small contribution. You can do just $2 if you want, or $1, I think. And you can ask a question, and the people who use the Super Chat are the ones that I answer their questions. I'm happy not to accept $1 from you. Some people, I'd rather not ask me questions, and certainly not, I'd rather not take their money. Should USA stand up to China over opening of the wet markets where exotic birds like bats were sold? The Chinese don't understand root of pandemic. Yes, I think the U.S. should stand up to China over opening up the wet markets. I think the wet market should be closed. I think there's all kinds of pressure the United States can put on China in order to close those wet markets. It should. It should. Absolutely. I mean, clearly these are threats. You can't stop individuals from eating bats. You can't stop individuals from eating exotic animals or other things, but you can stop markets. And, vast expanses of these things where the probability of... Wet markets are not farmers markets. Wet markets are where live animals are being sold as food in a way that you don't see in the West. And if there's a link to bats, you can certainly demand that bats not be sold as food. But the United States will not do that. The United States has no clue how to deal with China. It has no clue what to do about China, how to treat China. So I'm all for eating animals. I just think you have to be careful with some animals. You have to cook them really, really well, because otherwise, and I don't know if heat kills viruses, but that's something that we need to find out before we eat bats, right? If you can cook them hot enough so that you kill the virus, then I have no problem. It's the live bats that are the challenge, right? What's your thought on the Montessori teaching method? Did you use it for your kids? Yes, I used it for both my kids. I love the Montessori teaching method. I think it's the right one. Of course, it depends on the school. Not all schools use Montessori right, so you have to do a lot of your own research into what Montessori really wrote about, what the Montessori method really is. I have a whole collection of Montessori's books here, so you have to really get up to speed on it, and then you have to go and test the schools and find schools that are appropriate. There are a number of objectivists who have run Montessori schools, for young kids. I also think that you have to watch it. A lot of schools apply Montessori to older ages, and it's not clear to me that they are as applicable to the older ages, but certainly they're applicable. Certainly they're applicable to younger ages. Michael, thank you. That's very generous. Thanks. So I think from very early age, from 2 even, until maybe grade 1, potentially until grade 3, Montessori is the best educational system out there. So certainly for kindergarten and pre-kindergarten, but even up to grade 3, Montessori might be the best that you can find out there. It felt very refreshing to read in one of Ayn Rand's lectures, "Giving is the least important activity on earth." Can you elaborate? Yeah, I mean, trading is the most valuable activity on earth. Well, the most valuable activity is producing and then trading. But if you think about the value to humanity, how much of humanity has come out of poverty because of charity or because of foreign aid? Almost none, right? How well the society is focused on giving, otherwise socialism. Even voluntary kind of socialist arrangements like a kibbutz or like a commune. How much have they produced and benefited mankind? None, negative. They're disasters. What has actually benefited human beings in terms of individual human flourishing? It's producing and trading value for value. Philanthropy is nice, but it's just not that important. Not that important. Philanthropy in emergencies can be very useful. You know, somebody's house burned down, somebody's just lost his job and he's got a family to feed and he has no savings, so you can help somebody out like that. But it's not a long-term solution for anything. And it can't really focus efforts in the proper way because it doesn't have the signals that markets do. In other words, prices. Markets are amazing at allocating resources. Amazing at incentivizing people towards productive behavior, towards moral behavior. So giving in and of itself is, it's okay. Nothing bad about it. Giving presents is nice, but you have to produce in order to give a present, in order to afford the present. So yes, I think Iron Man's absolutely right. So de-emphasize giving in your life. Emphasize production and trade. Production and trade are the virtues that you can build your life around. Does it ever bother you that you weren't able to convince your family members of objectivism or turn them into objectivists, particularly the smart ones who should know better? It did when I was young. It did when I was trying. I'm not trying anymore. I primarily tried, I think, with my parents, and it was stupid. I've figured out for a while now that, that after a certain age, it's very difficult to convince people to change their mind about important things. So you shouldn't really try that much. So it doesn't bother me anymore. I've understood that, wow, Carlos, thank you. Although I don't know how much that translates into because I don't know what the exchange rate is. But I really appreciate the support. I don't know how much. You shouldn't put a lot of effort into your family. Your family's an accident. It far more upsets me that I can't convince my intelligent acquaintances or friends or my students or you guys. That bothers me much more than my family. My family is my family. And again, after a certain age, it's very difficult to convince anybody of anything new. So it's young people that worry me that I can't convince. Smart young people. And I think a lot of that is me. I'm just not obviously convincing enough or haven't thought of enough good examples or good ways of teaching it. But I'm a pretty good teacher. So I don't think it's just me. And part of it is them. They're not honest enough. They're not aware enough. They're not focused enough. And a lot of it is the educational system that has corrupted people so much that they can't. So as a teacher, you have to be aware of, am I giving the right examples? Am I doing this in the right way? Am I making the best case possible? And I think for the most part, I do as good of a job as anybody. But I'm certainly aware that you can always do better, and I try to do better. And I don't shrug the consequences of I haven't convinced somebody, it's all their fault. I never go to that. I always think, could I have done better? But now when it comes to family and now when it comes to older people, I'm talking now about young people. But the educational system makes it very difficult. People don't think today. People don't use their minds. They're not oriented towards facts and logic. And you can see that. You can see that even on the message board here, on the chat here. How many people are just focused on emotion? How many people are focused on their beliefs rather than on facts? They believe what they wish rather than what science says. And it's very hard to take a mentality that is not oriented towards facts and reorient it towards that. Reoriented towards that. And of course, the Anyway, all right. Due to the shutdown, I have lost my income and where I live. We're not legally required to pay rent this month. Is it wrong not to pay? I mean, I would talk to your landlord. I would say, look, I'm in a really bad spot. I would typically pay. If I could, I would pay, but I can't. And since I'm not legally required, I'm not going to pay. But as soon as I can, I will make it up to you. So as soon as you have the money, make it up to him. Now, again, if you were renting for the government, I'd say go for it. Or if you have to get unemployment insurance, get it. If you're going to get the stimulus check, cash it. If you're running a business and are eligible for one of these PPP loans, take it. The government is destroying our jobs. The government is destroying our businesses. It's handing out cash. Why should the people who support the government's effort to destroy our lives get the cash, and us who are opposed to the government's effort not get the cash? I'll cash in the end. So no, you got to take care of yourself, get whatever, but you got to treat other people who are honest people, think of the landlord. He's trying to make a living. And of course, the landlord has a mortgage, and he has to pay for that. So he's probably has to go to the bank now and say, look, people are not paying my rent, and I have to renegotiate with the bank, and the bank might give them an extension, but at the end of the day, the bank's going to want all the money paid. So if you can get, what I would do is defer the rent, not zero it out. Say, I can't pay now, but when I get a job, I will make every effort possible to pay you every rent check that I owe you. Just like he has to pay the mortgage whether he gets the rent or not. So don't take the lockdown out on the people where it's not their fault. Watched your 7-part lecture in defense of finance recently. Thank you for the invaluable content. Yeah, I mean, that's, if I can say so myself, that is pretty amazing content. If you're interested even marginally in the world of finance, investment, economics, then I highly recommend it's available on YouTube for free, audio only, so you can focus on just the content in defense of finance. It's amazing how we still have the same talking points 25 years later. Yeah, it is. There's my frustration. How have any of your viewpoints changed since then? Not in my defense of finance course. No, I think pretty much everything I said in that course I would still stand by. I mean, I also did a course on investing probably 25 years ago. And there's certainly things I would change there. There's certainly things I've learned about the market and how it works that I didn't know then, and primarily I learned through experience how in certain respects, how inefficient it is in certain times and places. And that would affect probably my defense of finance. I think in the defense of finance, I said markets are for the most part efficient, which I still think, and certainly the most efficient we have. But there's certainly a sense in which markets, particularly in times like this, types of massive uncertainty can be very inefficient, and there's certain types of stocks where markets can be very inefficient. Right. Somebody asked if I use options. I don't. I've had nothing against using options, but I don't because my strategy, I don't need it, and it doesn't play well with what I do. My trading strategies are not short-term. They're all long-term. If you don't like your sibling, but cutting them off would hurt your parents, whom you love, what should you do? Be fake and keep things civil? No. I mean, you should cut off your siblings, and you should let your parents know that you love them, but that your life is too short, too important, too significant for you to sacrifice for the sake of people you don't like, who you think are not good people, and you appreciate that your parents don't think that, but this is the way it is, and you want to stay civil with your parents, and you want to have a good relationship with your parents, but you're not willing to have a relationship with your sibling. I mean, don't sacrifice because of blood, because of genes. Is the objectivist movement slowing? No, I don't think so. How do we create more basically intellectuals? Well, I think we've got all the pieces in place to create more intellectuals. I don't think there's any secret sauce, there's any gimmick that would create more intellectuals. We need more people reading Ayn Rand. We need more people taking these ideas seriously, and then we need more people to get involved in the teaching programs of the Ayn Rand Institute. We need more people to get involved in the Objectivist Academic Center, and more people to study Leonard Peikoff properly, but the Objectivist Academic Center, but more important than that, read and study Leonard Peikoff. So we need more serious people who want to be intellectuals and who take being an intellectual seriously and then do the things necessary to become an intellectual. And that involves both studying by themselves and interacting with the intellectuals today who can teach them a lot about the world. And, all the people that you mentioned on the list, including myself, all studied at the equivalent of the OAC. We all studied at, I studied at the Objectivist Academic Center. I studied at the Objectivist Graduate Center in the 1990s. Alex Epstein was in the OAC. I mean, all the existing intellectuals in objectivism benefited from interaction and studying with older intellectuals who had more experience and more knowledge. And I think young intellectuals should do that today. I think one of the problems with some young intellectuals in objectivism, or people who want to be intellectuals in objectivism, is they don't think they need anybody else. They don't think they need to go to school. They don't think they need, and I don't mean university, I mean school as in other objectivists teaching them that they can just read Ayn Rand or Leonard and that's enough. And I think that's a mistake. I think you learn a huge amount by having your writing critiqued, by having your teaching critiqued, by going over essays and hearing multiple points of view about them, by seeing how some of the best thinkers in the world today deal with philosophical issues. So some people are just massively arrogant and don't embrace all the resources they have today. But that's what we need. We need serious people to engage with the ideas seriously with a goal of becoming a significant intellectual. And you need to be, and good intellectuals. I've seen a lot of good intellectuals over the years, but if they have psychological problems, then they don't last. If they have self-esteem issues, then they don't last. So psychology matters. And I think that, again, a lot of people who try to be intellectuals or claim to be intellectuals have real psychological problems, and they can't handle it. And so they, in one way or another, they self-destruct. And you have to be, being an objectivist intellectual is incredibly stressful. It's incredibly difficult because you're going up against the culture constantly, and you're going up against other people constantly, and you're disagreeing. Even among objectivist intellectuals, we disagree. And you have to have the self-esteem, and you have to have the psychology that can handle that. And I know more people who don't, unfortunately, and therefore they disappear from the objectivist movement. And that's sad, because we need more intellectuals, not less. But we need them to be healthy, and we need them to be engaged with the world, not engaged with their acolytes, not engaged just with the people who admire them and love them, but engaged with the broader movement, engaged with the broader world. We need them to be able to debate, engage, learn from, teach other people. So, yeah. So I think we need more intellectuals. And I've given you some of the ways in which I think you get them. Now, it's not superfluous objectivist intellectual, because not all objectivists are intellectuals. It doesn't make any sense, right? An objectivist is somebody committed to these ideas. But you can be a businessman, you can be a student, you can be a gardener, you can be anything. An intellectual is a profession. And it's a career. And just like any career, you have to take it seriously. It's not so. Objectivism for living is a certain scope of the objectivist corpus. Objectivist for an intellectual, for a teacher, for a writer is a much broader. To be an objectivist intellectual is to have a career as an intellectual. It's to take objectivism and study it in a way that an objectivist businessman shouldn't and wouldn't. Or that an objectivist amateur wouldn't and shouldn't, because they don't need to know it to that extent. I wouldn't know how to apply objectivism anywhere near as much as I do today if I wasn't an intellectual. That is, if this wasn't one of my careers, if I didn't spend, hours and hours and hours every day figuring stuff out, studying, reading, thinking, engaging. So just because you're an objectivist doesn't mean you're an intellectual. An intellectual is a career. And it's not a career on the side. Not a career on the side. And it's not true that a real objectivist is an intellectual, because a real objtivist who anybody who seriously applies the ideas of objectivism, applies Ayn Rand's ideas to his life. All right. What are your thoughts on 2A? What's 2A? Hank Johnson and Warren have recently proposed more gun control regulations since the shutdown. That makes it harder to exercise our right to bear arms. Yeah, I mean, all our rights are going to be under attack. I am not one who thinks that the right to bear arms is the most important right. I'm much more worried about the right to free speech, right to assembly right now. I'm much more worried about the rights of property, the rights to conduct business without regulation, the rights to conduct, 2A is Second Amendment, sorry. The right to pay your workers whatever you want, the right to engage in economic activity. Was mean much more than the Second Amendment. I don't think that the American people are ready to revolt against their government. I don't think that American people are ready to use their guns against their government. If they did, I'm not sure what kind of country they would establish. I just don't think there's a spirit of liberty. And if there's without a spirit of liberty, do I really want lots of people to own guns and to have guns and to want to revolt against their government? I mean, what do we get if they're not pro the Founding Fathers, pro liberty? And it's not clear to me. Look, the fact is the government just shut us down, told us to stay home. We can go outside and walk our dogs, but that's basically it. And does anybody launch the revolution out there? What are my weapons good for? Who am I going to shoot? So I'm all for the right to bear certain arms. I'm all for the ability to defend yourself. I'm not big on this idea of we're going to start a revolution. For an objective discussion of the environment, see the philosophy of privation, an anti-industrial revolution, and Return of the Primitive. Absolutely. Return of the Primitive is a brilliant book by Ayn Rand. Also see The Moral Case for Fossil Fuel by Alex Epstein. So yes, read Ayn Rand, The Philosophy of Privation and the Anti-Industrial Revolution. Both are essays in The Return of the Primitive. And generally, The Return of the Primitive is an amazing book that she wrote, and it basically articulates the whole case about against environmentalism as an ideology. And she wrote it in the late 60s, early 70s, which is stunning. And it applies as much today as ever. Dr. Amesha Dalja does not prefer lockdowns, but given our seriously limited testing capacity, does he support the lockdown to keep the hospital system going? I think on a limited, constrained basis, yes. Given that we failed, given we have a mixed economy, given we're not testing, given the failure of the administration to do what was right, there was probably no choice at some point in New York. But then it has to be quick and over. And the tragedy is, but it's a predictable tragedy, that the time that the lockdowns has given us has not been used to massively expand our testing capacity. New York doesn't now have, Como has not mobilized millions of testing kits with thousands of testers and trackers, because that's what New York needs tomorrow to start testing everybody as you phase out the lockdown. So, yeah, as an emergency, right here, right now, you can do that. But then it has to be over, and there has to be an exit plan. And you have to use the time in order to make that exit plan a reality. And none of that has happened. None of that has happened. What would you recommend to someone who attempts to be a top economist? Which area should you focus on? Well, you should study Austrian economics. And you should study some Chicago school economics. You should combine the two, study both. You should probably study Austrian economics at George Mason, get a PhD. PhD is valuable. And Austrian economics is well taught in George Mason, even though most of your professors will be anarchists. You just have to ignore it and avoid it and stay away from the anarchist arguments. But you'll study a lot of good economics there. And then also study the Chicago school, whether it's Friedman, Lucas, today the grumpy economist, John Cochrane, and others. John Cochrane is excellent on coronavirus. I highly recommend going to his blog, Grumpy Economist, and listening to his podcast and reading his blog about it. He's excellent. He's got his economic analysis of what's going on and what will happen is excellent. So he is really, truly unique. So that's what I would recommend, is following those economists and getting a PhD, probably at George Mason. Why would someone not value Yaron's time and knowledge? I don't know. Why wouldn't they? Just the time he puts into researching these shows alone is productive and informative. How can anybody not value that? I don't know. I'm not sure that was the super chat, but thank you. Thank you. I assume that was part of somebody who was commenting on that I'm not of value. But those of you who do value me and express it in your financial support, whether through super chat or through YaronBrookShow.com or through Patreon or Subscribestar, or now through Locals, I really, really appreciate it. Thank you. You make it worth doing these shows and make it possible for me to do these shows. Why was Hitler an environmentalist, vegetarian, and a nationalist? Because he was an irrationalist. And he was a nationalist. That was the integrating portion of it. But when it comes to environmentalism, he, like many Germans and like many German conservatives of the 19th century and the early 20th century, were very much opposed to capitalism, opposed to industrialization, and longed for a return to nature. It's part of their philosophy. A return to nature, a return to small villages, a return to when Germans were Germans and they lived with nature, and a return to the mythology where Germans were Germans and they fought the gods or whatever. A return to kind of a simple, primitive life. A life, and this is the root cause. The root cause is a rejection of reason. And when you reject reason, what have you got? You've got emotion. You've got instinct, so-called, which is emotion. So they want to go back to a world of emotion, which is a world in which we live like animals. It's a world in which we eat just what's available, because remember, hunting requires thinking. And it's a world focused on the tribe, which is nationalism. So rejection of reason would lead somebody to be a committed environmentalist vegetarian. Not to say every environmentalist and every vegetarian has rejected reason, but to really commit to it. And to nationalism. And to me, there's no difference between nationalism and environmentalism as ideologies. They're both irrational, immoral, and the fundamental about both of them is the rejection of reason. Fiat currency fundamental to advance of statism. Absolutely. I mean, if you want power, you need to be able to control the banking system. If you want power, you have to control finance. If you want power, there's no quicker way to control power than to control the money. It's no accident that as soon as money was invented, kings took it over and started stamping their portrait on coinage and taking responsibility for coinage, right? Even our Constitution allows the government to coin money, which is a big mistake. So statists All statists throughout history, from the beginning of money, have understood that money is their tool, and of course fiat money, which gives them almost unconstrained ability to flood the market and manipulate the market and control the market, gives them almost unconstrained power. So they love fiat money, and it's a massive tool for the continuation and thriving of statism. Thriving not as thriving as for human flourishing, but thriving as growing in its influence. All right, this will be the last Super Chat question, what OMG Puppies just put up. I can't take any more. We're already at an hour and a half. All right, 3 questions. Some grandparents would rather die of corona than of loneliness from separation from their families for years. Safety is only value being identified in the situation. That's true, but this is the issue. If they get sick, who pays for them? If I'm paying for them, well, then they should be considerate of my pocketbook, right? And I am paying for them, and you are paying for them. And this is why this is the evil of socialized medicine. We're paying for them through Medicare because we all pay Medicare to pay for our grandparents' treatments. This is the evil of socialized medicine, whether you call it Medicare, whether you call it socialized medicine or the NHS. It makes us all care about your behavior because we're paying for it. So if you're obese, that's not good. I get to pay for your medical treatment. If you have heart disease, so exercise. I want to force you to exercise. Go on a diet. I want to control what food you have. Somebody says, if only Yaron ever had Epstein on. You mean Alex Epstein? I had him on a couple of weeks ago. So, yes, I agree. Some grandparents, and if they paid their hospital bills, then they could be completely indifferent and they could die by their own terms. Or if they're willing to commit as soon as they get corona to taking a pill and dying without putting strain on the hospitals, which I am paying for, then, fine. But they're not, right? So they want to be taken care of. They want us to pay for it. And they want to be able to put strain on the hospital system so that people who have cancer are not going to get treated because there's so many old people showing up at the emergency room. So again, you have to balance things off, but I agree, safety is overemphasized and safety seems to be the only constraint. What are your thoughts on Thomas Sowell? I love him for the most part, but I disagree with him on a lot of things. I mean, Thomas Sowell is very much a conservative when it comes to many cultural issues. Thomas Sowell is a free market, but a conventional economist. If you read his economic textbook, it starts out with the idea that economics is the study of scarcity, resources under scarcity, which I think is a massive fallacy in economics. But I love Thomas Sowell, and I encourage you to listen to him and read him. But a lot of what he says is wrong. A lot of what he says is motivated by kind of conventional conservative thinking. He's not enough of a radical, and he's not enough of an independent thinker. And he certainly, when it comes to ethics, or even when it comes to the role of government, he has a much too expansive view of the role of government. And in ethics, he's conventional. He gives too much respect for Christian altruistic view. Right? Actual primitive societies were not harmonious. They were shockingly violent. Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And I really recommend this book by Steven Pinker, Better Angels of Our Nature, which talks about the history of violence. Fabulous book. Highly, highly recommended if you want to understand how peaceful life is today and how violent it was when we lived in anarchistic societies, tribal anarchistic societies. What's your take on morality? I'm answering this because he put a lot of dollars, even though I said the last one would be the last question. Thank you, Dallas. What's your take on morality of business affected by government shutdown taking stimulus? Is it similar to Rand's reasoning in accepting Social Security benefits being just since you're forced to pay it? Yes, although only if they speak up against it, right? And by the way, Ayn Rand said, if you read her essay on scholarships, she said, those of us who speak up against the stimulus against Social Security, against government giving scholarships to students, are the only ones who have a moral right to accept it. Because if you're speaking up for it, you're speaking up for theft. And therefore you lose the moral right because you're supporting theft. It's only people who are against theft, who want to change the system, who want this as some emergency funding or some of their money back and will continue to fight the system, then it's legitimate. But for the airlines who go hat in hand to the government at every crisis, at every opportunity, for them to go and get a bailout, or for the cruise industry, really? This is a known danger of going on a cruise, is that you could get a contagious disease. It's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. So I'm all for, you're a small business, you want to keep your employees, get one of these PPP loans, but the big bailouts with all the strings attached, all the constraints, all the cronyism, and for businesses that don't support the end of cronyism, I'm against that. I'm against that. So in the financial crisis, if you were a bank and you said to the regulators, I don't want your money, and then they told you that if you don't take it, you're in trouble with them, and you took it, then I think that's great. But if the regulators said, here's money, and you said, yeah, great, give me the money, I love this cronyism stuff, then no, it's not great. So stand up against it, speak up against it, write an editorial, write a letter to the editor, say, I'm taking this money, but I'm against the fact that it's being provided. Then you morally deserve it. Or you could support the Yaron Brook Show, where I say for you that we're against it, we think this is bad, we think this is anti-freedom, we think this is anti-American, and we're against all form of it, and that will also count. All right, everybody, have a little bit of a Sunday left and then back to work for those of us who are working. Tomorrow, the market looks like it'll open down, which will create some excitement. I'm looking forward to another week of... I'm working harder now than ever, given the market movements and given the number of shows that I'm doing. So thank you all. Whoa! Another big check, or another big dollar sign. So he says, no single idea has provided me more psychological clarity than accepting that the purpose of my life is to achieve my own happiness. Thank you for introducing me to this idea. Well, I am thrilled that it was me who introduced that to you, that idea. Of course, the person who gives that idea content and guidance is Ayn Rand. So thanks. I think we all owe a big thank you to Ayn Rand and to Leonard Peikoff for, articulating her philosophy in such an amazing way, and for continuing to teach her ideas. So thank you, Ori, and I will use this opportunity to thank Ayn Rand and Leonard Peikoff on behalf of all of us. Thanks, everybody. Have a great week. I will probably not tomorrow, probably Tuesday. We'll do a show on Tuesday. Bye, everybody.